Well, good morning. My name is Chris Thorne, and welcome back to Making Work Work. I am an executive and career coach, and my mission is to help people love what they do. And one of the ways that I do that is I help people to understand how and why they think and do what they do so that they can think better, feel better, and achieve more. Because when we understand our thoughts and feelings drive our actions and results, we're in a much better place to get what we want from life. Now, I love speaking to people that are making a big positive difference. And my guest today, I'm so excited to bring him to you. His name is Paul Holbrook. He is creator of the Diary Detox. Paul, how are you?
I'm very well. I've got a bit of a lag in my
Uh-oh.
connection, so
We might
hopefully
have an
this is
issue
all
with
going to
the
be
Paul.
okay. Can you hear me? Can you
Oh,
hear me?
sorry about that. Okay. Okay.
Can you hear me
So
okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to try and change network as well, just to make sure that we don't have such a problem, but
Okay. All right. Shall I give you just a moment to do that then?
just give me a moment and I'll just make sure that we're all good.
Okay, right, fine. So to all of you that are listening out there, just to give you a bit of background, who is Paul Holbrook? Well, Paul worked for nearly 20 years in management in the city. And after a long career, he had an epiphany and he decided to become a coach. And along the way of coaching people, he discovered that, although he had some great interventions, great help to offer people, that the key thing they always kept coming back with is, I just haven't got time. And so Paul had a bit of a light
Indeed.
bulb moment that, you know what, solve the time issue, we can solve some of the other issues. But there's a lot more to it than that, isn't there, as we'll discover. So Paul, tell me what
Hello.
you've been doing recently. Are you back now?
I am back now.
Okay,
Yeah, we've
okay,
got
good.
super fast broadband, but apparently isn't that fast.
Oh, right, okay. Well, Paul, listen, I understand that you are a keen athlete, keen cyclist, swimmer, and you recently completed just remind me, the My Ride London,
Ride
didn't you?
London.
Yeah, so what was that?
Yeah, so basically it's an annual event. You've got three kind of main events in London every year. Well, other than the London Triathlon, which I've also completed a few years ago. There's Ride London, which is a 100-mile ride around the Surrey Hills. There's London Marathon, of course, and then there's another one called Swim Serpentine, which is a 2-mile swim around the Serpentine Lake in Hyde Park.
Oh my
And
goodness.
2 weeks ago, even though you can't actually do the full Ride London because of COVID and lockdown, they created something called My Ride London. So as long as you have an app and you do a 100-mile ride in a location of your choice, you can do it. So I did that 2 weeks ago around the Cotswold Hills. It was beautiful,
Oh, fab.
but it took me 8.25 hours. I
Oh my
was so
goodness.
tired.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
Oh
But it
my
was
gosh,
good. I really
what a
enjoyed
ride. Oh my gosh, it must have taken you a little while to recover from that then.
it. Yeah, well, we'll probably get onto that later on.
Oh,
But
okay,
yeah,
okay.
it took me a little bit of time to recover, but not as much time as other things have taken to recover from.
And I understand that your chosen charity for this is the Guide Dogs for the Blind. Now, how did that come about? I know you have a dog, and your dog Loki well, she's sort of featured along in your podcast, isn't she? So what is it about Guide Dogs for the Blind that you got to promoting that charity?
Just always been a fan of dogs. I've had dogs since I was a child. And when you're looking to do something like this, you want to do it for charity. You want to have a charitable cause there. And I
Mm,
was looking through a number of the charitable causes, and I wanted something that really spoke to me. And I think, not only something that looks after dogs, and there are dog charities who, they will rehome dogs, etc. I
mm.
just love the idea of, Loki is a Labrador, and that's a very common guide dog variety. And I just saw it and it spoke to me. And I thought, I want to support them. So that's why I did it.
Amazing. Well, Paul, listen, I know we're all really curious to know, how did you get from where you were to what you're doing today? And kind of tell us your story, really, in terms of how this evolved and how the Diary Detox came into being.
Sure. I'll try and make it a shorter story. So I basically spent 20 years in the City of London. I started off as a coder. I wrote computer programs,
Mm,
after I left university. And shortly after, I think it was about 2 years after I'd started writing code, I realized that I was more interested in how people worked than and how computers worked.
Mm.
And so for me, it was a natural transition to go up the management track. And so that's what I did over the next 18 years. I did that. And along the way, there were some lulls and there were some highs. And one of the particular highs was that about 10 years in, I was offered the opportunity to go from running a team of 15 people between London and Frankfurt to running a division of 350 overnight. And
Wow, that's quite a jump up, isn't it?
that was a jump, yeah. And I had massive imposter syndrome when I did that. But it was really unusual, the reason I made the decision to do it. I made it because I was really concerned about the alternative if I didn't. And I didn't mean that about for me, I meant for that position, because a lot of senior managers within that industry, within the city, within financial services, I didn't feel that they were doing what I felt managers and leaders really should. And especially within technology, it's a massive challenge because technologists are technologists at heart. And like I say, people management comes second. So I thought, well, if I really believe in this and I've really got a different view on how I want to do it, then I should just bite the bullet and do it. And I did. And over the next 4.5 years, it was the job I was born to do. I absolutely loved it. But then things changed. I had a bit of a life event that made me kind of think about what I wanted to do next. And I stayed in the city, but I went into contracting. And it kind of the same thing happened over and over again. I was still seeing these companies I was going to and seeing these managers that I didn't honestly think were managing very well. And my wife turned around to me, and it was about 3 years ago. She turned around to me and she said, look, you're not going to be happy unless you're running it, whatever it is, or unless you're helping others run it better, whatever it is. And she said, why don't I look after us for a while and you go start a business and let's just see where we get to. So that's what I did. So I retrained as a leadership coach. And something very fascinating happened, because I'm actually not a coach now. It's something I can do, but it's not something I label myself as. As I started to market myself as a leadership coach, people would say, look, it sounds really interesting, Paul. There's only one problem. I haven't got any time to talk to you. I'm just too busy. Which is a little bit frustrating. But then what kind of happened is I thought, well, it kept happening. People kept saying the same thing. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. Are they saying this because they really mean it? Or are they just saying it as a way of getting rid of me?
Yeah,
and I had to find out. Yeah, absolutely. And it happens all the time. You know, I'm too busy. That's the kind of eternal excuse for anything.
It's kind of a badge of honor, isn't it, to say that you're busy, isn't it?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I had to find out whether they were really telling the truth. So I basically, when I was running that 350 person division, I'd often have people coming to me and saying, I'm too busy. And I had this little process, 2-step process that I would just run them through that would tell me whether they really were, and it would very quickly show them why they were. And I thought, I wonder what will happen if I do that thing that I used to do back then with these people here. And it told me exactly the same story. It told me, what was in their diary, and yes, they were very busy. But the second thing it showed me, and this was the real light bulb moment for me, is that the reason they were busy was because they were filling their diary with things that they honestly 100% believed they had to do, but they didn't. And when you're running, it sounds really arrogant to say that, but when you're running a division of people, it's very easy to say, well, that's actually not your job. Don't worry about that. I can help you with that, or we can delegate that, or whatever else. When you're doing this with people who don't work for you, the next objection, I suppose, is they say, but you don't know my business. You haven't worked in my business. You don't know my life. And so I thought, well, I need to find a way I can see that's not something you should be doing, but I need to get you to see it as well. And so I came up with a method, a categorization system and a couple of other things. And I turned the 2 steps into 5 steps, and they spell out the word detox, DETOX. That was the genesis of the Diary Detox. And from that moment, I realized that there's a lot of coaches in the world, case in point, you are there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of them are very, very good. But that's not what people need. They don't need another coach now. There's loads of you guys out. That's brilliant. What they need is they need a way of seeing that a lot of the stuff they're doing, they don't need to. And then they will come to you, because then they will know that they need you. And that's what the birth of the Diary Detox was.
Oh, Paul, that's fantastic. Can I just take you back on one thing that just kind of caught my interest? And that was, You know, when you mentioned the imposter syndrome, because that was quite a big jump up, wasn't it, to go from 15 to 350 people? And you know, it sounds to me as though, you know, would I have this right to say that maybe what helped you to kind of overcome that was kind of having that sense of almost a mission, really, that, you know, you saw things that were happening out there that were not actually helpful and good leadership and good management. And you thought, hey, I can do this better. And I'm kind of like going to get over myself. I'm going to kind of put myself out there and I'm going to do this. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that was partly it. I mean, that was certainly the thing that made me go, yes, I have to do this. But one of the other reflections that I have back to that time was that I actually think it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because at that point, you know, I was an ex-technologist, and technologists are very hands-on people. And I think a lot of the challenges that managers, people who are becoming managers, are going through is they're having to navigate that new reality that their old job is no longer their job. Their new job is to manage people who are doing their old job. And I think, you know, when I stepped up, I probably would have been in danger of being one of those people that would have really struggled. But when you have 350 people working for you, you have to step back. You have to learn to delegate really quickly, because there's just no way you can do 350 people's worth of work. Whereas most managers kind of go through the process by taking on one person and then two. And it's easy to kind of keep your hand in, helping them, doing their stuff for them. With 350, you have no choice. So it also was probably one of the best things that could have happened to me, because it taught me the power of delegation and the necessity for it. And of course, the fact that you're developing people by doing that.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, and is there any other advice that you'd give managers that, you know, might find themselves in a similar position to that? You know, as you're saying that they need to, you know, maybe they've been given a chance of promotion, or they need to step back, or maybe they're even a business owner who needs to take people on to scale the business, and they've never really managed people before, and they know they've got to master this whole black box of leadership and management. I mean, is there anything that you'd say from that experience that you think might help them?
First of all, I'd say buy my book. And
Okay,
then
obviously.
secondly, and then when they realize that what they used to do, and I'm sure we'll talk about all the colors, when they realize that what they used to do is red and what they now need to do is green, one of the things you can do to be green is to hire somebody like you, hire a coach, and be taken on that journey. You know, my role now is not really to coach. My role is to really open people's eyes as to what is really happening right now, and to bring out the essence of what the new reality of your role as a manager is. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've been talking very recently to learning and development organizations. You know, they will put people through management and leadership courses. And I've seen that. You know, I've been on those courses, and a lot of them are very, very good. But the biggest challenge is at the moment is a lot of our attitudes towards training are about showing managers or people stuff that they should do. But the thing is, a lot of managers, they know what they should do. The biggest problem they have is they don't have the time to do it. And the reason they don't have the time to do it is because there's a load of stuff they shouldn't do. So my biggest advice to them would be to find out what it is that you no longer need to do. Find out the things that are no longer adding value to you in your role as a manager, and focus on removing those. Because if you can remove those, all of the good stuff will just seep into that space that's left behind. And that's the essence of what I do.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? And well, I mean, were there any other challenges that you faced as you were getting this all off the ground and developing this system? Because I remember reading recently one of your posts, and I thought this was so ironic, is that, you know, I think you'd spoken to a few people recently, and they're like, oh, Paul, we need you. We really need some help managing our time. And then you offer to do, you know, a session or discovery, you know, I think you do like a discovery hour, don't you? And offer this to them, and they're like, we just haven't got time right now. And when things calm down, then we'll get back to you. And it's like, hang on a minute, didn't you contact me because you needed help with time? And now you're saying that you don't have time to, it's mad, isn't it? So,
I mean,
so is that still a challenge, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it always will be, I think, for a while. I think, yeah, the biggest irony is, you know, people saying they don't have time to deal with their problem with time. And at the very beginning, I used to get really frustrated, verging on the angry, because, you know, I'm really passionate about this.
Yeah.
Because I see that it is possible to be so much less busy very easily if only you just commit a little bit of time to it. And it's not like you're going to commit an hour and then you'll get back an hour. You only have to commit an hour, and you could get back tens of hours. So that time you think you don't have, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. And yeah, the biggest challenge I had on the journey was that I was of the impression that I would just, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Field of Dreams, Kevin
Oh, yeah.
Costner.
Yes, yes.
And there's a phrase in it that says, build it and they will come.
Ah,
And
yeah.
that's
Oh,
what
I
I thought
remember
it was.
that.
Build Diary
Ah.
Detox and they will just come beating the door down. And they didn't. It was a very quiet place. And for the first 2 years, I realized that my existence was to build a brand. It was to build an awareness, because one of the biggest objections people have, and I hear all the objections, I really do, is people will say, well, if it was that simple, wouldn't everybody be doing it?
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
like, yeah, but everything that is a great idea
but they
is
don't.
found for the first time by somebody, and they haven't. So yeah, that was a real frustration. And I used to get really, really frustrated. And it was my wife again, actually, that turned around to me one day and she said, you can't get angry about people not having time to deal with time, because those are the people that really need you. And if they weren't angry, they wouldn't need you and you wouldn't have a business. It was like, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
actually.
that's true.
That? So that's the biggest frustration, I think, is getting people to unlearn the really, really bad habits and undo the myths that we've built around time management myths and management and leadership myths. And there are so many. And we've convinced ourselves that there is no answer, but there is.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so true. And what are some of your, because you have some very good habits, don't you? What are some of the habits that you have that you think kind of help you for success? Because I remember reading that, you finish work at a set time, you take Loki for a walk, and it's like, how many people actually put something like that in their diary and honor that commitment to themselves? I mean, what other good habits do you have that you think have helped you to become successful?
Okay. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that the Diary Detox is the way it is because of how I work. This isn't something I had to invent. This is when you get a Diary Detox, you're basically getting a kind of a main line into the way my mind thinks. And the things that I believe have made me successful in my previous career and hopefully now as well are having a really clear view on what it is I want to achieve. And it's interesting, we'll talk about the colors, but actually the colors and categorization, I thought that they were going to be the most important part of the Diary Detox, and actually they're not.
Oh.
The most important part of the Diary Detox is the middle step, T. And T stands for targets.
Okay.
And what is fascinating is that having a really finely tuned view on what it is that we're looking to achieve, rather than what are the tasks that we want to do, because a lot of tasks don't get you where you want to go to, but we convince ourselves that they do. But if you focus on targets, an end point, a vision point, a strategic end, it's amazing how those perception of tasks that need to get you there actually change. It's like, well, that's not actually going to get me there. If I want to go there, the best way is via this route. And it's by focusing on that end point. So that's one of the things I think, is having a very clear view on targets. I think also a very clear view on what's adding value. A lot of times we go through the motions of doing tasks. You look at a job description, it will often describe the duties of the role. And those duties are a set of activities or tasks that you need to go through. What's interesting is that with work I do, when I use my color coding system with people who look at those activities, they'll say, but I have to do that activity. And then when you ask them about what color that activity is, they'll tell you an answer that they didn't expect, which is that it's not adding any value at all. So I think having that finely tuned view on what's really adding value, that's probably the second thing. And I think probably the last thing is time out. Taking time out.
The blue.
It's having blue behavior. Yeah. I mean, that's not in the book. The book. That came out after the book was published.
Okay.
That has been a revelation, I have to say. And I'm doing a keynote at, you're aware of the Flexpo Business Digital Summit.
I am, absolutely, yeah.
September. So I'm doing a keynote there on what managers can do to better help their people right now. And this is a spoiler alert. You're going to get a spoiler alert as to what my keynote's going to be about. And the rebel brand, the brand of Diary Detox is a rebel brand. It's there to say, we're not going to do that silly stuff anymore. We're going to do something different. And I'm going to say something quite rebellious to people, which is the best thing you can do is you can teach them to not work sometimes.
Oh,
Give
wow.
them a way of not working. It's the most important thing you can do right now, especially with the pandemic that we're going through right now.
Yeah, because people are they're just burnt out. And I was reading something the other day that said, we have kind of like you have like sort of a surge capacity. You have like a short-term ability to to deal with a lot of stress and pressure. And then after that time, our reserves just kind of drop, and then we're really having to kind of find our way back and kind of recharge those batteries. And of course, with the pandemic, because it's just gone on so long, and everything just keeps changing at a rapid rate, it's very hard to get your heads around that. So that's going to be fantastic, Paul. Well, I am actually planning to go to that summit, so hopefully I'll get to hear that.
Great.
So tell us then about the Diary Detox. Talk us through the colors and just how does it all work?
Okay, so basically what I tried to do, so I went to one of those leadership development courses. It's worth giving a little bit of a preamble, because I think this probably sets it up quite nicely. I went to there was a company that I used to work for, and they did an employee pulse survey, and that pulse survey asked a number of questions, and in those questions there was some around leadership. And that company, it was a 100,000 person company, and it said that their people felt 44% well led. Now that's not a big number when you've got 100,000 people running around like headless chickens. So they did what any self-respecting organization would do before they realized the Diary Detox existed, of course. And what they basically did is they ran a leadership development course. They bought in an American organization, they spent millions of pounds putting about 40,000 people through this course.
Wow.
And it was 3 days, separate days. And it was brilliant. I went on one of them. But here's the issue, is that 1 year later, having done that, they retested, and it said that people felt 34% well led.
Oh no.
Now that's 10% drop.
I was going to say, hang on a minute, that's a lot of money to spend to just see a nosedive like that, isn't it?
Well, isn't it just?
Oh.
And I went on one of those courses, and I think the answer came, and obviously I didn't know that was going to happen a year in the future, they're going to retest it, but during the morning, I thought it was really good. And I said to somebody, I sought out the oldest person in the room because I thought they'd be the most experienced. And I thought, I'm really interested to see what their perception is. So I said, what do you think of this? And he said, yeah, I mean, it's all right. I mean, it's nothing I haven't seen before, which in itself was a really interesting insight, because they're right. Nothing that they were saying was rocket science. Nothing was revolutionary. They're just telling us what any leadership and management course tell us. But it's what he said next that blew my mind. He said, the problem is, how am I going to find time to do all this new stuff when I've already got this stuff on my plate? And for me, that was like, it was like an atom bomb going off in my head, because I don't think he realized what he was saying. Because what he was saying was, how am I going to have time to do all this new stuff? And remember, this new stuff was the stuff that was going to improve leadership in the organization, when I've already got this other stuff that has basically given us a 44% well-led rating. So if I'd have had the presence of mind in that moment, I'd have repeated back to him. So you're saying, how are you going to have time to make things better when you're already spending all your time making them worse? And I think at that point, it would have been fascinating to hear his response.
I was going to say, did you ask him that question? I would have loved to have seen his face. No.
I wish I had. But what that did for me, and remember, this is just before I left the city. I mean, that was like, I think probably the seed moment where I thought, I need to get out and do something different.
Right, okay.
And I thought to myself, so what is that stuff that he swears he needs to do that is so important, but is giving him such bad results? And so I thought, I need a way of figuring out what people are doing and how valuable it is. And so through my own experience and through conversations I'd had with other respected leaders that I felt were respected, I came up with 7 categories. And so I made it so that anything that you do at work every day, anything, will fit into one of those 7 categories. And 3 of them were green, 2 of them were amber, 1 of them's red.
So a traffic light system, really easy to remember then.
Yeah. Well, my background was in technology and change, and we like a RAG rating, red, amber, green. But I went beyond. I had another color. One of them is brown. And we'll get to the brown one in a second. You guess what that was going to be. Yeah. So basically, I'll start with the red one. So red one, there's only one of those, and that is doing. Okay, and doing is this transactional stuff and administrative stuff. So if you are a salesperson and you are selling, then you are doing. That is what you do. If you are a process improvement specialist and you are improving a process, then you are doing. Sounds odd, but I'll get to why that isn't green. Don't want to be too much of a spoiler. So you've got the red stuff, which is transactional administration, traveling to meetings as long as they're required, etc. Then we've got the amber stuff, and amber is the essence of managing. Okay. Now, managing is just two things. If you look at somebody who is doing a job and you look at their supervisor who is managing, they're only really doing two things. They're looking to make sure that things are happening the way they should be, what I call monitoring.
Yeah.
And if they're not happening the way they should be, then they do something else, which is usually directing. They'll give instruction. Oh, you're not doing that. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the essence of managing. Those are the two amber ones. Then you've got the three green ones. Okay. Now the three green ones are leading. Okay. And leading for me is about, I mean, think about what leaders are there for. The reason we follow leaders is because they give us the promise that they're going to take us to a better place.
It's growth.
So how do leaders, absolutely, growth, making things better, improvement. And there are three things that leaders have to do in order to make things better. They have to think about how to make things better. So I call it thinking.
Yeah.
And that can be vision, strategy, plan, obstacles to achieve them. Then there's communicating.
Which
so
is what we're
that's
doing
talking
today.
to new people.
That's why we've got green
We are
today.
indeed.
Yeah.
That's why we're wearing green. And that's
Absolutely.
sharing new ideas or meeting new people. And up until that point, you've only thought about something and talked about it. To make things better, you've got to do one last thing, which is to actually do it. And that's improving. And improving isn't just improving your business. I always talk about improving in a very specific order. You're either learning, so improving yourself, you're teaching someone, improving somebody else, or you're improving your business, how it works, what it does, or who it does it with. So those are 6 of the behaviors. And then there's the last one. And the last one is floating. Okay, now floating is called floating and it's brown because brown things that float,
guess what that is,
are a waste. And it's basically,
I think we can understand what that is. Yeah.
I actually did a 5-minute tour.
But it is memorable, isn't it? So
it has to be. And it's really interesting because somebody actually turned around to me one day and said, I don't like the brown. Can you change the color? And I said, no, because when you see that color in your diary, I want you to think, oh, get rid of it. Get rid of the waste. So yeah, but waste is quite an awkward word to use. Some people could get quite offended by waste. So it's not necessarily about waste. It's about when things don't add value, or when you're not sure what value it's adding. Right. So if you go to a meeting and you're walking in there not knowing what your role is, or you don't know why you're there, you don't know what the outcome of the meeting is, at that point, that's a floating meeting because you have no way of knowing whether it's going to give you what you want. So that's what I did. I created those colors and I created a way of people applying those colors to their diary to give them a sense about how much of their week was spent. Green, making things better. Amber, keeping things where they are. Red, taking them potentially backwards. Or brown, taking them nowhere.
Okay. And I mean, so once people understand what the behaviors are, I mean, what sort of process would they go through then to use this system?
So the method, the Diary Detox method, the 5-step method, you actually, when you're taught the method, you go through it 3 times in the first session. There's something called the initial Diary Detox. And what that is that's about teaching you the steps, and it's about applying that to a week in your past. To look at a week in your past to find out what you're actually doing up until now. And it gives you a sense. I mean, so the steps are diary, evaluate, target, opportunity, and exchange. And you go through those 5 steps, and it gives you a sense of what you're doing, the actual things you're doing. That's the D, diary. It gives you a sense of the value you're getting. So that's when you color code them. That's the E, evaluate. Then you think about targets. What is it, ignoring your diary, what is it that you actually want to achieve? Why are you in this job? What's the end game that you're looking to get to? And just having a think about that in itself is quite an opening moment for people because they realize that the objectives that they've been working to for the last 2-3 years are nothing like their targets, which is a real eye-opener for people. I get a morbid sense of enjoyment out of seeing that, but I'm sure the house does. And then opportunity is about looking at the difference between the two. Is everything that you need to achieve in your diary? And it's a simple yes or no, and you get a tick or a cross. And then the last step exchange is for everyone that you have a cross against, think about what it is that was missing that you wish you'd had in your diary that week, so that you can learn from it and make sure you do it going forward. So that's the kind of first way through. And then there's two other times you go through it. One is the weekly detox, so you teach people to do that on a weekly basis on their own. And it's a way of reflecting back at your week and then planning your forward week. That's the weekly detox. And then there's another one, because there's a spot detox, because we always get interrupted. Even if you plan your future week, everything's going to be perfect.
Things happen.
Never going to be perfect. You're always going to get somebody interrupting you. And the spot detox is the thing that you apply. It's the same 5 steps, DETOX, but you apply them in 30 seconds. And it's a way of figuring out, do I really want to be interrupted right now? And it's not about telling you what to do. It's about helping you make a better decision about what you want to do.
So, would it be safe to say that that's sort of your opportunity to kind of it's almost like a contingency plan, isn't it? So if something unexpected happens, which it will, won't it? Even if you, as you say, you set out the perfect day, I'm going to achieve these, these objectives, these 3 things or whatever. And inevitably, because I've heard this from other time management teachings that I've gone to, in terms of allowing a good sort of hour and a bit, what they call contingency, or things to go wrong. Because things take longer than you think, or, you got to follow up on something, as you say, something unexpected happens. So it sounds like this is kind of a way of evaluating in the moment how to manage that, which sounds fantastic.
Yeah. And I mean, the colors also have a different significance as well, to that point you just said, which is that, having some contingency time, whilst the red, amber and green give you a sense of how much of your time is spent operationally, tactically or strategically, they also serve another purpose, because using my method, if you do your weekly diary detox, then when you look at your future week at the end of your weekly detox, it actually has very little space in it. It's actually completely full. Oh, are you there? Have I lost you? Hello. Oh, maybe I'm the host. So I think we've lost Chris, and I'm just going to fill in some time now until Chris rejoins. It's going to be rather awkward, because based on what I can see here, it looks like I'm still live on Facebook. Where do I go from here? Oh, there you go. Chris is
there
back.
we are. We're back. Continue. Okay, so sorry about that. We love the technology, don't we? You've got to be flexible. So sorry. So we were just to kind of pull us back. So we were just talking through the idea of contingency, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of a story you were telling me earlier, which I thought was great to kind of bring in here. Was what are some of the myths of time management? Because you had a great story that you were telling me about this earlier.
There's one particular myth that I always focus on, and it's the myth that everything that we're doing is something that we believe we have to do. And if you look at a lot of time management processes at the moment, they will look at what you're doing. They will say, okay, so you're spending this amount of time traveling, and you're spending this amount of time in meetings, and so on and so forth. And that's all very well and good, but that just tells you what you're up to. It doesn't really give you a sense of anything else. And the story that I had is one of the early workshops I did a diary detox with 6 people in the same room, and one of the people was a high growth knowledge coach. And when we spoke about the color coding, they said, well, I already color code my diary. And I went, okay, well, do you mind me asking how you color code it? And they said, well, for example, all my travel time might be black, and all of my administrative time might be red, and all of my client meetings are amber, like a yellow color. And I said, okay, why did you choose yellow? And they said, well, yellow because yellow reminds me of gold, and gold reminds me of money. So therefore, client meetings, money. And I went, okay.
Yeah, okay.
I said, so how often did you ever have meetings where those client meetings don't result in the money that you thought? And they said, yeah. yeah, it does actually happen. And I said, and what color are
Mm.
those? And they said, well, they're yellow. And I said, but they didn't result in money. And they go, okay, what's your point? And I said, well, my point is that most time management methods, the way you do color coding, will color code what it is you're doing. The
Mm.
difference between that and Diary Detox is that Diary Detox doesn't color code what you're doing. It color codes the value you get from what you're doing.
Ah,
So
that's quite
what would,
key, isn't it?
well, it should be, because I mean, think about the biggest challenge we've had before COVID, although even after COVID, it's probably just as much the problem. We had lots of problem with people going to lots of meetings. Okay. And let's say those meetings, I don't know, let's say they were client meetings or team meetings. Most people would color code that meeting a specific color. And the challenge is that when you talk to most people about the value they get from the majority of meetings they go to, they will often say, I don't get any value at all. And it's like, well, then you're going to have to change the perception of what that meeting looks like to be able to question whether you really want to go to it. So, of course, what we then did is we color coded that person's client meetings using the new color coding method. And a lot more of the meetings were brown. They were adding no value whatsoever. And what was really fascinating is it was the mere act of recategorizing something that should have been green, should have been a green meeting with that client, but it in hindsight became brown, and it made them go, why was that brown? And what they realized was that they weren't preparing for that meeting as well as they could do. So even the mere recategorization of that color made them question it, think about a strategy to change it, so that, yeah, still have meetings with clients, but prepare for them better. And if they then become brown still, then think, have I really solved the problem? That's a big myth for me. And, you know, telling people that they shouldn't go to meetings or telling people they shouldn't do certain things, no, do it if it adds value, but recalibrate your idea about whether something adds value rather than just assume it does because it's with a client or it's with your boss. That's another one, meetings with your boss. The number of those that end up brown is fascinating.
I was reading it. That reminds me, and I was reading an article a while back about how Microsoft, they'd really, in this whole lockdown situation, people had really started reevaluating, how many meetings they had and how long some of these meetings were and everything. And then people really started to think about, does this meeting need to be an hour? Or could we do it in 30 minutes? And then it's like suddenly there was greater awareness around, well, hang on, in order for something to justify as taking, an hour to have this meeting, does it really need to? And it's interesting how when you start to kind of just shift that awareness around how necessary is this, what are we actually trying to do here, and being a lot more intentional and thoughtful behind it, then all of a sudden you go, well, actually, maybe we don't need to be doing this. And it also made me think, could this system potentially be used to help companies reevaluate, the actual design of the jobs that people are doing? Because how many activities in these jobs could we either eliminate or automate or delegate or, give to someone else whose skills and strengths are better suited to that activity? We just sort of blindly accept that, to do a customer service role or sales or, whatever it is, that there's, as you say, a job description, and this is the skills, these are the activities required to achieve those targets, but they're not always the right activities, are they?
No, you make a really good point, and it's not something you and I have discussed before, actually. But there's a couple of stories there, actually, and one in particular, I think it's quite funny because what the categories actually do is they give you a language, a new language, and it's actually, I would say, it's a less emotional language to challenge what's really going on, and I'm really going between these two stories, but I've got to tell you the one about the guy and his PA. Absolutely fascinating. I did a Diary Detox with a head of HR, and their PA got to come for free because, somebody in their PA, they are one person, and the PA is the greatest weapon against time. So they
are the diary, aren't they?
Absolutely. And what was really fascinating is we were going through the E-step, the evaluate, where you color code an activity. And there was this one meeting that was 2 hours long. And I asked them the question, so what do you think that was? And they said, oh, it was communicating. And I went, okay then. And I said, so what was it communicating? And they spoke about these things that they did. And it did indeed sound like it was a communicating meeting. And what my peripheral vision's quite good. And I had the head of HR here and I had their PA over here. And all I could see out the corner of my eye was the PA going, just shaking her head. And I thought, oh, right,
No.
okay. So I looked at her and then looked at him, and he looked at her and he went, what? And she said, are you honestly telling me that that 2-hour meeting couldn't have been done in an hour? And he went, well, yeah, it could.
Ooh.
And that was brilliant, because what she then said was, but by the definition of this, and this is an interesting one, which is everything you do at work can be put into one category. And the way you decide, because you could spend half the meeting doing a lot of good stuff and half the meeting doing the rubbish stuff, which color do you choose? Well, my statement is you choose whatever took up the majority of the meeting. And so in that particular one, they spent the majority of their time floating. And she said, then that's floating. And he went,
Oh.
oh God, yeah, it was, wasn't it? Now, she didn't have to say the word, you were wasting time. She said you were floating, and because he knew what floating was, just a loss of value, they had a really easy transactional conversation. And I won't tell you the story, but I had a very similar one where a CEO did a diary detox. They then asked me to do it with their executive team. And parts of the way through, I felt like I'd lost one of the people. They were kind of looking out the window, and I said, what's happening there? And they said, does anybody else think that that task that, let's call him John, that John's asked us to do for the last 2 weeks that none of us have done, does anybody think that's floating? And they all agreed. At the end of the session, when he came back in the room, they challenged him on it in front of me and said, we haven't done it because we think it's floating. And he said, why do you think it's floating? And they had, for the very first time, a conversation about how he had single-handedly failed to tell them what the value of this thing that was. And what it actually got them to do is they got to the point where they went, oh, so it does have value. And they did it. So when you have this non-emotional language to challenge people on, I think it opens communication channels. So yes, to your point, it does give companies a new way of challenging each other in a non-emotional way, a non-judgmental way, in a parental to parental way, and to realize that some of the stuff they do, they just don't need to do anymore.
God, and Paul, I mean, I love this because I'm also thinking, just giving people like a language, really, a way of communicating and resolving what could potentially be a very, could be a very big conflict. And also I'm thinking that it kind of ties in a little bit to what we were saying earlier, where you were telling me that on the face of it, you might think that this is a time management system, but actually it's really more of a leadership development system, isn't it? And it's kind of a backdoor into getting people to really look at what behaviors and what actions they need to be taking to be a leader, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that coach that color coded all of their stuff yellow because they thought it meant gold, their business partner actually came to that same event, and in the afternoon break, they said to me, what's your plans for this? And I said, why'd you ask? And they said, this isn't about time, is it? And I went, ooh, okay, what do you think it is? And he said, this is about growth, isn't it? And it's like, absolutely, you got it in one. This is all about the difference between managing, which is quite a transactional, but it's just a tactical thing. It's the difference between that and leading. It's the difference between doing stuff that needs to be done and doing stuff that only you can do. And that's the big difference between this. It is a leadership and management development tool, but people very rarely want to admit, or are even able to admit, that they have a problem with their management or leadership. But the moment you ask people about their time, they will automatically say, yeah, I've got no time, I'm too busy. Well, what they're actually doing in that single moment where they admit that is they're potentially saying that they have a management or leadership problem. So it feels quite manipulative. You're taking a back door to address a real challenge, but that's partly what coaching is. Yeah.
And I see it all the time. I think sometimes you have to give people what they want in order for them to realize or see what it is that they actually need, isn't it? And it's lovely because you're giving them like a nice sort of almost like a safe space, really, a safe way of kind of actually the pennies dropping, really, without you kind of having to really be too obvious about it. It's like you don't have to say very much at all, do you? How does this flexible working, because obviously you're speaking at Flexpo, and what is it that got you interested in the flexible working movement, I might say? I mean, what is it about flexible working that you're passionate about?
So we've just spoken about the fact that Diary Detox isn't really a time management tool, it's a leadership and management development tool. And one of the frustrations I always had when I was running a big division of people is that I had managers working for me who would stand in the way of their people working flexibly. And that would frustrate
Oh, okay.
me. And because I'd sit there and think, well, all I'm bothered about is the target, where you're looking to get to, and whether you're getting
Yeah.
there. That's what's really important. The location doesn't matter to me. The amount of time you spend doing it doesn't matter to me. If you can get me the target in 15 minutes, then have the rest of the year off. I'm okay with that. So I was probably one of the more enlightened. I wasn't unique by any stretch of the imagination, but I wasn't common either. But I started to look at my managers and try and figure out why they were standing in the way of it. And I kept hearing the same two statements. I'd hear, first of all, well, how can I be sure my people are actually going to be working when I can't see them, instead of just watching Jerry Springer or doing the ironing or doing whatever. The second thing they would turn around and say is, and how am I going to deal with it if the floodgates open? If I give it to one, I've got to give it to everybody.
Oh, so that's
actually,
the classic excuse, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. But the thing is the second one is actually a problem of the first one, because if you are comfortable in doing it, you won't care if the floodgates open. So I kind of ignored the floodgates one. I think that's a bit of an insincere objection. The real challenge is the first one. How am I going to get to the point where I trust that my people are doing what they should be doing?
It's all about trust, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. And this is a challenge I have. If you look at things like LinkedIn right now, when you talk about flexible working, and people say, well, the only way you're going to get flexible working is if you trust your people. And I think language has a lot to answer for in this, because trust means very different things to different people. So, for example, and this is going to sound like a really, really extreme example to use, but but I think it illustrates it really well. I trust that my wife isn't going to go and have an affair, and I don't have to look at her. I don't have to check her phone to make sure that happens. That is trust. I trust that she won't do that. Managers, are you really going to completely hands off and trust that your people are going to do everything they should without looking at all? Because that's what we call abdication of responsibility. Yeah. And that is not the kind of trust we want. We want delegation, and delegation is being very clear about where it is you want somebody to be able to go, not about how they get there, just where you want them to go. And it's also about keeping an eye at a distance, and only as much as is required based on your perception and based on the person you're managing's perception. It's also making sure that things are happening. Now, that sounds a lot like monitoring, one of the AMBER behaviors. So being successful at delegation is about being very clear about a direction and setting targets, which is the green behavior, and being very clear on whether things are happening the way they should, and that's the AMBER behavior. But when you look at a lot of managers, they're spending a lot of their time red and brown. So the reason flexible working came up for me is that, well, actually the big reason we have a challenge right now is because a lot of our managers are red and brown. If we could find a way of getting them more green and amber, then we might have half work, because the reason we have a problem with flexible working isn't because we don't have enough people wanting flexible working. Everybody wants it. The reason we don't have it is because managers are standing in its way, and they're standing in its way because they're worried that there's control. And that's basically why I got involved in the flexible working movement.
You know, and do you think that maybe one of the reasons that we have that lack of trust is either because, you know, we have some, let's be honest, some very outdated ideas of what it means to go to work in terms of, you know, having to be in a set place from, you know, 8 to 5 or what have you. And also that sort of sense that unless you can keep an eye on things, you know, you don't know, but it's happening. But is it also maybe that they genuinely don't have the skills on how to actually manage, you know, different schedules and people, you know, doing different activities to just kind of keep an eye, that they, you know, it's partly that they don't really quite know how to manage it, as in what they should be doing. And I remember one of the podcasts I heard you do early on where you spoke about this monitoring, and you spoke about, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, by trusting people, it doesn't mean that you just kind of leave them to their own devices and hope that they turn up and they've achieved the outcomes. It also means that, you know, you've made it very clear, you know, look, okay, here's the project, for example, here's the milestones, here's the activities, here's the deadline we have to hit. And then you just kind of building in some logical kind of checkpoints to make sure things are happening, but also making people aware that if they have an issue or problem, you know, getting those activities completed, they can come to you as a manager for support or help or what have you, in order to do that. So is it also just equipping them with those skills?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my, I mean, I created like a subsite on my website, which was for flexible working. And one of the things I say on that, I like to make fairly broad brush statements because it's part of the Rebel brand. But I think it also gets people to think, "Ooh, is that true?" And one of the things I say on that is that if make working is because you can't trust what people are doing when you can't see them, and you don't have a flexible working issue, you actually have a management issue. Because that's exactly the same as when you're sat at your desk. You know, if you're sat at your desk, you can't see what's on your person's opposite you's screen. Yeah, we're kind of fooling ourselves into believing that just because you're sat at your desk, you're doing productive work.
You're doing something.
Whereas I don't care what work
Yeah.
you're doing. I care whether you could be, I mean, you could be surfing the internet. I mean, I know you are, because, you know, there have been companies that have done reports on this, and we know that depending on who you believe, anything
Spyware.
between 20 and 70%. Well, yeah, I mean, the spyware. No, I mean, the company I was talking about, Adobe, commissioned a report back in 2016, and they basically they realized that people were floating for 20% of their time. And if you talk to someone like Andrew Brown, who wrote the 4-Day Week, the Economist article that he read that made him want to do the 4-Day Week suggested that people were floating for 70% of their time. 70%.
Wow. Gosh.
You know, so, but
that's,
you know, let's not kid ourselves that just by sitting in front of somebody and watching them doing that it is resulting in anything useful. You know, that isn't the way it is. But if we start to focus on what we want to achieve, start to get people to talk to us about how they're going to go about achieving it, and about sharing with us that journey, whether it's working, that's true management. That is where you really start getting the benefit.
well, and I remember you saying earlier, you know, that you kind of flipped this whole idea of what management is on its head, which I really loved, where you're talking about, you know, we have this perception that, you know, we were talking about a sales manager, I think, is the example, and you're speaking about, you know, this thought that, okay, so, you know, I still need to go out and do, you know, this work and achieve these sales targets, and then kind of on the side, I'm going to kind of manage these people and develop them. And actually what you're saying is the real skill of a manager is you flip that. And so your focus is to develop your people and to get the best from those people so that you aren't having to do as much of that. Is that right?
Yeah, my approach to management has always, look, when you're doing a job, and look, I was a coder at the beginning of my career, so I was writing code. When you're doing a job, if you make a mistake, it's limited to you. You fix it, you learn from it, you move on. When you become a manager, it's usually you're managing, let's say, 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 people, maybe 4. And here's the challenge, is that when 3 or 4 people are making a mistake, it's amplified. And I think we make the mistake as fledgling managers in believing that our job is to carry on doing what we used to do whilst managing people on the side. Whereas I do like to flip it on its head. And the reason I was, again, not unique, I was just rare, was because the moment I became a manager, my perception of my role completely changed. It was, my job primarily is to manage those people. And any spare time I have, I will spend coding. Now, what actually happened is I never ever had any spare time to code, because all of my time was taken up managing people. But because I was managing those people, they were being developed, and I never had to code because they became more productive as a result of it.
Yeah.
So I think it is about reimagining what, you know, the perceptions of what management really is. And I think it happens very much so in the technical disciplines, coders, accountants, consultants, lawyers. We're experts in something, and therefore we believe that our value is in our expertise. When you become a manager, your value is in your ability to bring out that expertise in other people, not about doing it yourself.
Oh, see, and I love that, because you're right. Because obviously the whole point is that if you develop those people that they can then step up and take responsibility and ownership and do that work, then, I mean, that's obviously the win-win, isn't it? So you're not having to do that. So you're having to really step away from being a technician and into being a manager of people, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, depending on what level you are in an organization, the amount of the green, amber, and red you have to do varies, I would say. And when you're at the very top of the organization as a CEO, there's no red. You shouldn't be doing any of the operational stuff because that's not your job. Your job is to spend as little as possible, but enough
Yeah.
of the amber stuff, just making sure that things are okay. No
Yeah.
balls are being dropped, no spinning plates are falling. And the
Mm.
majority of your time, about 4 days a week of your time as a CEO, should be spent on green behavior, thinking,
Mm.
where are we going next? Your
Mm.
COO probably be doing something quite different. They'll be probably a little bit more on the amber. They'll be looking a little bit more to make sure what's going on and a little bit less on the green. So it depends on your role in the organization, what the split of colors that you would expect to see. But yeah, it is
Right.
completely, I mean, it's not reimagining what management and leadership are. They've always been the same thing. It's just we haven't done it very much. So it's probably just
Yeah.
holding ourselves to account and holding that mirror up for a change to see what's really going on.
Yeah. And listen, just can I just ask you one question that we need to wrap up, but
Mhm.
making mistakes, because what in order for people to grow and develop, I mean, inevitably they're going to have to make mistakes along the way, otherwise there is no success without failure. And yet we often see people penalized for failure. Even people will be let go from their jobs if they fail. And how do we sort of manage, how do we kind of balance that between giving people a safe space in which to fail and make mistakes so they can grow, but also holding people accountable to where if they really have gone too far and really messed it up, there has to be some kind of accounting or reckoning for that.
So I think the responsibility is on the manager. So you've probably seen a video I did probably last week where I was probably ranting about the fact that whenever somebody makes a mistake, everybody jumps up and says, sack them. And
Oh.
the problem is that in the most cases, it's the first time they've ever made that mistake. And so,
Mm.
it's okay to make a mistake once because that's how you learn. And I did another video, a year or two ago where I said, let's just start changing the word failure for learn. You're not failing,
Mm.
you're learning. And that's a really important thing. Now, if you do it a second time, exactly the same thing, then
That's
there's a
not
bit of a tough
learning.
conversation to happen. But here's the thing. I think the responsibility, and this is often misunderstood certainly by junior managers, people who are just moving into the space, is that if something goes wrong, okay, generally, if when I started being a manager, I would give relatively small tasks that could be made a mistake of, because that's how you learn. You learn by making mistakes. It's like if you have a child, yeah. When your child goes off, you're looking and you think, okay, they might fall off that brick they're standing on, but they're not going to hurt themselves mortally. So I'm not going to get involved in that. I'm just going to let them make the mistake, and it'll be okay. They'll cry for a little bit, but they're okay. They'll know not to do it again.
Mm.
If they're walking towards a fire, slightly different. If they're walking towards the edge of a cliff, completely different. Okay,
Very
then you get
different.
enjoy. But here's the thing: is that the responsibility is on the manager to
Mm.
decide what is a reasonable level of risk. And what I
Mm.
think we tend to do as managers very early on is we give too much freedom too
Ah.
early. We step back, we close our eyes, we close our ears, and
And
we
we
just
hope for the
ignore it. And
best.
then we
Yeah.
hope for the best. We come back and we find it hasn't worked. And what's the first thing we
Ah.
do?
Whether we
We
don't
have a go at
trust
the
them.
person who
Yeah.
did it, and so we trust them less. Now, the interesting thing is that the going away and covering our eyes and covering our ears and giving them too big a task to fail at was not their fault. That was the fault of the manager.
Oh.
The manager should have been very clear about, is this too big a task to give? Or if it is a big task to give, then maybe I have to look more to start with and be very clear with the person that I'm going to look more so they don't feel like they're being micromanaged. And then
Mm.
as you look more and you see everything's okay, you start to look less, and then it's okay, and then
Mm.
you look less again. It's not that you just stop looking. So I think we have to give people a safe space in which to do that. And what we will usually find when you look at the colours of a new manager's diary is that they won't be spending very much of their time on the green and amber stuff. They'll be
Mm.
spending it on the red, which means they've stopped looking, and you're hoping that's going to make them go, oh, well, if I'm not
Mm.
looking, that means something could happen without me knowing about it. So what are you going to do about that? And then you hope that they're going to start to bring in more amber into their diary.
Yeah. Oh, Paul, that's a great tip. And obviously, it seems like it would make sense that, as you're developing people, you'd stretch them as well. You give them tasks that you can see will develop them, or give them opportunities to learn new skills or develop their strengths, or, or
Mm.
take on new and more creative work. That is fantastic. Paul, what sort of things are you up to at the moment? So I know you've got the book out, which, by the way, I will put all the links to Paul's book and there you go. And I'm opening up on the 16th here, which is fantastic and be a great event. And all proceeds from Paul's book are going to support Guide Dogs UK. So do please buy a book. But what else are you up to at the moment then, Paul?
Well, you heard me at the beginning say that I'd completed that 100-mile ride around the Surrey Hills. So that's actually only part one of a three-part epic.
That's right.
And the first part I've done, which is the 100-mile ride, that was done 2 weeks ago. And the next part is that I'm going to complete the London Marathon on the 4th of October, which is going to be interesting.
Wow.
And then the last part is to swim the Serpentine, 2 miles around the Serpentine Lake. Now, that unfortunately won't happen this year. That's now been postponed till next year. And if you complete all three of those, then that constitutes what they call the London Classics.
Wow.
And all of those things I'm doing for Guide Dogs for the Blind. And so, people have the ability to either donate to my giving page for the Guide Dogs, or I make it easy for them. It's there, sorry, not there. It's the wrong shoulder. If they buy my book, then all of the profits go to the charity.
Fantastic. Oh, great. And Paul, if anyone wants to know any more information about you or how to get in contact, obviously I'll put the links, but where's the easiest place to find you think?
2 places. You'll usually find me skulking around LinkedIn. And you'll usually find me wearing either a red, green, amber, blue, or brown t-shirt. So I'll be on there, and I'm Paul Holbrook, FCI, FLPI, Fellow of the Learning and Performance Institute. Or go to diarydetox.com, and then you'll find me there. Not Dairy Detox, as some people have done.
It'd be an easy mistake to make, I suppose, wouldn't it? But definitely, so Diary Detox. Paul, this has been, oh, great. Paul, thank you so much today for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And this is, gosh, this is fantastic stuff. I will be posting oh, you're welcome. I will be posting the replay and links to everything that we've talked about in the podcast. So until next week, thank you so much. And we'll see you next week on Making Flexible Work. And